Hi, everyone. This is a great time for inspiration, kicking off the Writers Retreat weekend of the Tennessee Williams and New Orleans Literary Festival. We're talking with Robert Jones Jr., who is as great an inspiration as I have ever met. Robert Jones Jr. was born and raised in New York City. He received both his BFA and MFA from Brooklyn College. He's written for the New York Times, the Paris Review, Essence, the Griot, and he is the creator of the social media, social justice community, Son of Baldwin, which you can find on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. His new book, The Prophets, was published in January, and it is a well-deserved bestseller. This is my post-it noted copy, so I can witness that. So Robert, thank you so much for being with us.
Susan, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we need some inspiration for our writers here. You know, they've come here to recharge, look for ways to move forward, or even get started. So I wonder if you talk a little bit about your story of writing The Prophets, which is very inspiring to me.
Well, the prophets. I am what do they call a late bloomer? Because I came back to college at the age of 31. Once I determined that writing was actually my purpose and not just some side hobby that I enjoyed.
Mhm.
And I went straight from undergrad to grad, did all of those years, 6 years together. And it was in my senior year of undergrad that this idea was floating around in my head for a novel. But I was so terrified of broaching the subject because it was something that I had not seen in literature before. So I let it just sit inside my mind and thought to myself, it'll never come to fruition. Fast forward to my first semester of grad school, I'm sitting in one of my first courses, a fiction tutorial course with Stacy D'Erasmo. And one of the assignments she gives us is to go out into the world and find objects that a character we're thinking about might possess. So I'm at a loss because I'm not even sure that this character that I've been thinking about um, was worth actually pursuing. Um, but then the second day, I come across sitting in the garbage cans on the streets of Brooklyn near the curb are a pair of shackles. And I said, what is this? What is the story behind shackles in the garbage can? Number one. But
Mhm.
number two, is this a sign? Is this character who has been inhabiting my mental space? Is it his way of saying, please tell my story? So I go back to class. I'm gathering all of the materials. I'm writing about who this character could possibly be, what his name is, what he looks like, how tall he is, what his favorite foods are, all these things that go into making fictional characters human.
Mhm.
And the first time he spoke to me, he told me that his name was Simon. And I thought, that doesn't seem quite right. Maybe I'm mishearing him. And it turns out that his name was actually Samuel.
Mhm.
And that was the very beginning, October 2006, of what would eventually become The Prophets. Then it was actually titled uh, Sing Hannibal, Bear Witness. That was the original title. Um, and that was 2006. And from that moment, I have been writing and rewriting and rewriting for 14 years until I got to what would finally become The Prophets.
So to give people a little sense of perseverance, would you talk a bit about the rhythm of your days and the rhythm of your years?
Absolutely. So when I was in undergrad, I was working 3 part-time jobs. When I was in grad school, I was working 2 part-time jobs. And then after I graduated, I went right into a full-time job. So one would say, well, when did you have the time to write? As Toni Morrison would say, at the edges of the day. So I would write on my commute to work, on my commute home. I would get up almost every night at about 3 o'clock in the morning, the magic hour, the witching hour, where the world was most still and quiet. And I would come into my home office and I would write for about an hour, go back to sleep, to wake up at 6, to get ready for work, and then continue writing on my commute, and then go to work and come back, continue writing. And that was my rhythm, because making a living, earning a living really eats away at your time. It All of that creative energy it takes, because I was working as a writer in Brooklyn College's Office of Communications and Marketing. And so that was eating up a great deal of my creativity, energy that I wanted to save for this work that I was doing on this novel.
Right.
But you have to earn a living. And that is the biggest conundrum of being an artist, I think, is that your time is sucked away by the demands of life. But you have to find a way to sort of redirect that, and make tiny sacrifices. So I had to sacrifice sleep, in order to, if I was committed to this novel that I thought needed to be in the world. I sacrificed an hour of my sleep, and I think that was a small sacrifice, given what I thought was, or what I think is, the work that I would be able to put out into the world. So my rhythm, I usually found at night, in the most quiet time in Brooklyn, and at the time where I thought the voices, the ancestral voices, were most clear.
Talk a little bit about going back to school after that time away, because the inspiration to do that came from a really great place.
Yes, it did. I was I was working at Bank of America for a time. I sort of self-sabotaged myself at that place, and wound up unemployed, sitting at home, working on my resume, because I panicked and thought, I need to earn a living. I need to earn a living. Let me find another job quickly. Turned on the television, 4 o'clock, Channel 7, Oprah Winfrey show was on. And I would always go to Oprah for inspiration, but I didn't think on this particular day, at this particular moment, this was the message I would receive. She had on a guest who was talking about finding your purpose. And what did he say? What did he say? He said, you know what your purpose is, and you've been avoiding it this entire time. And it felt like he was talking directly to me. And he said, don't worry about the last part of that journey, because if you do, you'll be overwhelmed, and you'll think you won't be able to accomplish it. Think about just what the next step you have to take on that journey to making your purpose a reality. So I'm thinking, what is the next step I have to take? I did some internet research, and this was in 2002, so the internet wasn't as robust as it is now. There was no such thing as Google.
Oh,
So I couldn't find very much information on what do I do to become a writer. But here's how Providence works. I'm at the unemployment office waiting online, and there's this poster right next to me that says, if you want to be then you have to, and then a list of things underneath it. And if you want to be, and I'm looking for writer, and under W, because it's alphabetized, it says writer, then you have to, and I scroll across and it says, get your degree in English. So I said, I have to go back to school. And I was so filled with shame, because I'm 31 years old, and I'm thinking, all of these teenagers, they're going to be like 18, 19 years old. And I'm going to be the sole old guy sitting in the class, and they're going to be wondering, what is he doing in here? So I said, but you know what? This is my path, and I can't be worried about what other people think about it. I have to do what I know I was put here to do. And if this is the first step, then I must take it. And so at age 31, I re-enrolled in Brooklyn College. I moved all the way back home because I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina at the time. I called up my mom. I said, Mom, I'm going to move back home because I want to go back to school. And she goes, your room is still here.
Oh,
So I came home, got some part-time jobs, re-enrolled in Brooklyn College, and the rest is sort of history. And it was not the shame that I imagined it would be, because there were so many other older students there as well. And we formed a community, and my experience felt like family. And also, it was so different from my first attempts at college when I was much younger, because this time I knew why I was there.
right. You had found your purpose.
Yes.
4 o'clock with Oprah is another magic hour. You know what I mean?
Indeed.
And going back to Brooklyn College puts you on a collision path with James Baldwin.
Yes. My very first semester back, Brooklyn College had a core curriculum, meaning classes that you had to take in order to earn your degree. And it was a breadth of disciplines, from sociology to politics to history, just the full gamut. And I took a course called People, Power, and Politics with Jeremy Crace. I'll always remember his name. And one of the first assignments he gave us was to read an essay by James Baldwin called Here Be Dragons. So I had some passing familiarity with James Baldwin, but I didn't know very much about him. I didn't even know he was a Black man. I had no idea. I just knew the name. I read this essay and was so moved by what I read, by the sheer brilliance of what was being communicated, that I sought out everything that had the name James Baldwin on it, discovered that not only was he Black, but he was also queer, grew up in New York City, and was a writer. All of the things that I wanted to be. So I immediately adopted him as my spiritual godfather. And was concerned that why isn't someone like him more celebrated in the general mainstream culture? Because he is being taught in the colleges, but I didn't hear about him outside of academia. So fast forward to maybe it was 2007. I'm watching this documentary on PBS about James Baldwin. And at the end of it, James Baldwin's brother is testifying to James Baldwin's last words before he passed away. And one of the things he said, which hit me like a gut punch, is that Baldwin said, I hope someone finds me in the wreckage. He had worried that he would be lost to time. And it made me cry. And I said, we cannot allow him to be lost. I said, I'm going to start a blog called Son of Baldwin, where I discuss all of James Baldwin's works and all of the things he talked about, race and whiteness and sexuality and politics, and sort of bring that to a modern audience so that it's a modern, widespread audience, not just people in academia. And this was pre-Facebook. So I was on a site called Blogspot. I don't even know if Blogspot still exists, but that's where it started. And then it moved to Facebook once Facebook kind of opened up, because it used to be only students had access to Facebook. And then they sort of opened it up to the general public. I moved it to Facebook, and that's when it sort of took off. And I'm proud to say that, and I'm not taking credit for this at all, but there has been a Baldwin renaissance. And
Yep.
he is now part of the mainstream discussions of all of these issues. And he's seen as a sort of prophet in many ways, because of the things he was talking about with such grace and aplomb, that we are now confronting in a 21st century society.
And of course, at the heart of the prophets, there's a chapter called Bell and the Dragon.
Yes.
So a bit of an homage there. You talk about him as your spiritual godfather. And I think it's so important, and I'm curious to hear you talk about this, to have someone show you what it is to be a writer. You know, especially people who grow up in small towns, who have dreams, but who don't see the way forward, don't see what to do. It's like you're finding that poster. That's like a little message from the universe,
Yeah.
and so talk about that feeling of having been shown the way by him.
My soul looks back and wonders.
Mm,
First I was lost, then I was found. Like I'm using these biblical references because Baldwin was so informed by Christianity. He was a preacher, a child preacher in his church. Finding Baldwin was confirmation for me that there was nothing wrong with me, that being Black and queer was not an aberration, that it was not sinful, that it was not despicable or disgusting, that I had a right to be. And not only did I have a right to be, but I had the right to tell my story. He did so eloquently, so brilliantly, that it gave me the path that if someone questioned that I was writing about these subjects, I could say, but James Baldwin was writing about this before me. Um, he was both a balm and a shield. And I wish I could put into better words what that meant for my younger self, encountering this art at a time that was in which I was utterly insecure about every single thing. Um, it was like he hugged me and patted me on the back and said, "It's okay. You may do this. I give you permission."
we all need that hug, that literary hug, especially these days.
And
Now, you
indeed,
had another inspiration that I found really interesting, and that was Wonder Woman.
yes. When I was 4 years old, my father, who was a comic book collector, I found out recently, bought me my first comic book. He bought me a Wonder Woman comic book, and I was just utterly enamored um, by this woman whose very jewelry was defensive weaponry. She
Right.
had a tiara that she used as a boomerang. She had bracelets that could
Yep.
deflect bullets. And I was just utterly amazed. She lived on this island where it was just women and they were peaceful, but they were also warriors. And her mom was the queen and she was a princess. And she came to America to teach us the ways of her people, to embrace love and kindness and peace. That just set off all the buttons in me. Like it was just like a powerful woman who has this great powers and great weapons, whose message is peace, who flies around in an invisible jet, who has a lasso that makes people tell the truth.
That's what I want.
We could have used that over these last 4 years.
Yes.
Um, and it inspired me so much that I wanted to be a part of that world. So at age 6, I started to rewrite the Wonder Woman stories with me in them as her sidekick.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And that is what pushed me. That was the very first time I wrote. So that was right there, Wonder Woman, my dad in Wonder Woman, giving me the platform, the foundation from which I then began to write.
What
And
a
that is where I attribute the origin story for my writing.
That's a good one. That's a really good one. Now, talk a little bit for me too about how this transactional like relationship people have with their characters. It's like Samuel telling you his name is Simon, and I can kind of see you turning that over and going, "You sure? Are you really sure?" But your characters, fictional characters, can inspire writers as well and during the process.
And you hear when you hear writers say that it sounds rather mystical and obtuse and metaphysical until you actually experience it, where you're writing something and it's almost as though a voice is talking to you saying, that's not right. I wouldn't do that. And you say, oh, wait, no. And you when you fight against them, and then you hit a roadblock, and you realize you have to go back now in the process. And why did I hit that roadblock? Oh, because this is not right here, and I have to fix that, like that voice was telling me that I ignored. And then you realize that these characters do have a sort of autonomy, and that you are in conversation. You're not directing it. You're not this like godly figure creating these characters. That it is a mutual relationship where you are both creating something together. That is one of the most shocking, but also rewarding experiences of writing. Is that you're surrendering to something bigger than you, and that character may have known it before you did.
And so many people refer to writing when the writing is going well as being in this state of grace, and letting it flow through you.
That is exactly what it feels like. My husband calls it the head in the clouds moment, where you feel as though you're a conduit for something else, and something sub or unconscious is taking over, and you just let it. If you let it, you find something that is just so sublime happens on the page, that you can't fully take credit for, but you are so thankful that you were chosen above other people to write that beautiful sentence that you think came from the ether, but really came from some shared creative space in the cosmos that all artists tap into.
So I have to ask you, for the sake of all the writers who are watching this, as you were coming along the way, what is the best piece of advice anybody ever gave you?
I was in maybe my next to final semester in graduate school, and I was taking a workshop with Ernesto Mestre. And I had had some experiences with my classmates that made me second guess my ability as a writer, that made me think perhaps this was a fool's errand, and that I was pursuing the wrong craft, and that I was maybe wrong in assuming that writing was my purpose. Ernesto looked at my draft. We went out to a cafe to talk, and he said to me, you have such a unique voice. This is such uncharted territory that you're writing about. Make me a promise that you're going to continue to do this after you graduate. And don't let anyone else tell you that this is not what you're supposed to be doing, because it is. Please keep writing. That was the best piece of advice I ever received, because we live in a society that doesn't always value its artists, that sees art as a frivolous endeavor, and sees other more lucrative professions as more important. But if not for the artists, and if not for the writers in particular, there are certain things about humanity that we would not be able to face, that we would not remember if not recorded by the writers, which Toni Morrison says this, particularly about fiction writers. Fiction is not fact, but it is truth.
Right.
And writers are the truth bearers. And so what I would say to all writers out there, even those who are still struggling with giving themselves permission to call themselves writers, please write, and keep writing in the face of all opposition, because your voice is necessary for the evolution of humankind.
Now, the other great piece of advice that I think you could give to a community of writers is that if you don't see what you need, make it, find it, be it. Look at what you've done with Son of Baldwin and what a difference that's made.
I suppose you're right. Toni Morrison says, if you cannot find the book you wish to read, then you must write it. That was what gave me permission to even think that I could start something like the Prophets. And so for every writer, yes, whatever that odd idea is, or that unpalatable idea is, or that unformed idea is, form it, put it down, write it, because it is necessary, even if you don't feel it in your bones as of yet, because I think all writers to some degree are insecure about their art. But courage, the definition of courage is being afraid, but doing it anyway. And I encourage all writers to please be courageous and do it anyway.
Well, you have been, that's for sure. Robert Jones, thank you so much. And thank you for the work you do.
Thank you so much for having me.